6 o'clock. Do you have 6 o'clock?
I have 6 o'clock.
Okay, let's do this.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 18th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Commissioner Olivas, do you want to lead us? He might be on mute, so. Stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. Okay, thank you. That was somewhat successful. Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
That was fun. Hey, John Marshall. You're on mute. John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm
Thank you. Peter Gower.
here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
Arthur Munoz.
Here.
Paul Olivas.
Here.
Alex Velto.
Here.
Kathleen Taylor.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Moving on to item number 3, public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. Michelle, do we have any public comment?
We received one public comment for this item, and that was forwarded to the commission before 5:15 this afternoon.
Thank you. Other public comment?
No, we did not receive any other public comment for this item.
Commissioner Olivas, I don't know if this is the time, but I'd like to make a comment if I could and make it a public comment.
Please do.
Okay. I guess before I go over there, probably don't have, but is there any representatives of police or fire with us tonight? We're probably home sleeping. But anyways, I just wanted to say something to them. And I live up on Ridgeview, and I wasn't here back in 2011, but I remember the fire. And last night, I watched all of our police and fire as they worked, and they were all over the place up here in Ridgeview. And I'm sure they were all over the place on other areas of town too, Collins, Skyline, Manzanita, Cash Hill. So, but what I saw, I was very impressed with the response. I really was. I think that yesterday, I thought that I wanted to give a shout out to RPD and Reno Fire Department, which I do. Great shout out to them for their response. But as the afternoon and evening went on, I saw even a much more coordinated response. And I thought that I need to give a shout out to all of the police and fire in northern Nevada. It was a very coordinated effort. I saw the sheriff's vehicles, Sparks fire trucks, Carson City fire trucks. Up on the mountain, I'm sure there were fire trucks from multiple agencies. That I saw the trucks up there all night, and I was very impressed. I'm sure I'm missing them. I'm sure there were a ton more that were out there that responded, and I was very proud of that. I think interesting one is even when the police were coming up my street, and I saw their cars, and they were very coordinated in their process of even going door to door. And they would jump, leapfrog each other in their cars and get out, and they'd go up a few doors and knock on doors and try to get to people. And come to find out, that was actually, I wondered why they were in minivans and SUVs and trucks. And that was a coordinated effort from the undercover, which it appeared that they had planned it, practiced it before, and they were just part of their response team. And I was very impressed by that. This was an all hands on deck effort, and they did a very good job. I know that there was damage and a lot of loss, and that's unfortunate, but it could have been worse, and I give a big shout out to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Olivas.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll pass that along. We're very proud of the response last night. You're right, it could have been much worse.
Michelle?
When you open the public hearing for item 4.1, we do have 3 voicemail that we need to play. So I didn't know if you wanted to take public comment prior to presentation or after Arlo did his presentation. So I wanted to put that out there.
Okay, Arlo, do you have a preference?
Why don't we do that now or before me?
Okay, could you open the public hearing then, please?
Okay. So moving on to item number 4, public hearing. This is recommendation to City Council case number TXT 21-00002 renovation zoning code update. Do we have any public comment, Michelle?
Yes, we received numerous public comment via email that were forwarded to the Planning Commission. We do have 3 voicemails that we will play for you in just one moment.
This is Brian Thornton. I'm commenting on case number TXT 21-0002, the renovation zoning code update. Planning Commission. Tuesday morning, I walked to the hillside above Evans Creek and looked south across Reno to the forested, snow-touched hills. I thought about my 2 kids just beginning their adulthood. I wondered if they will dare have kids of their own in this uncertain world. If they do, what will those kids see when they reach adulthood and look across the Reno Valley? Will there still be unburned trees and snow this time of year? The 18.04 Article 2 sustainability rules are a small but important first step to help protect and preserve the future and start the process to deal with climate change. I urge the Commission to include that article despite concerns raised by others. The earlier draft already included a transition period for existing projects and some flexibility for other new projects, so I also urge the Commission to not include the proposed 12-month voluntary period, or at least to shorten that to 6 months. Respectfully, Brian Thornton.
Hi, my name is Melinda Biancalana. I live in Carriage House, Fridgeview. I'm interested in commenting on the project that was given units to build at the corner of Lake Ridge and Plumas and McCarran. I would like to voice my opinion that the zoning be changed back from commercial zoning, which was given to the developer, whereby he added a lot of units to be built there, 4 stories. And I would prefer to have them realize that our neighborhood is no more than 2 stories, and it's already very crowded at that corner of Plumas and McCarran. Could they please consider giving a zoning of multifamily 14 or less, lowest density, so that they could build some apartments, but not too many for the area? It's a 9.3 acre site. I'm sorry I don't have the number, but I know today at 6 o'clock the Commission is going to address this. And Reno Land will probably come back with another proposal. Due to COVID and the holidays, I'm afraid that the many, many, many people that commented originally from the neighborhood objecting to them tearing down Lake Ridge Tennis and Swim Club, as well as the plans that changed and asked for them to build a lot of housing without appropriate parking. I hope they are not able to do that and come back this time when people are preoccupied with COVID and the holidays perhaps, and the wind today and the power outages which we have in our neighborhood. So my cell phone works, and I wanted to leave a message to say that I do represent quite a few people in Carriage House. I know other people have this opinion as well, that we would like to keep our residential neighborhood residential and not have that go to some commercial corner or to have the developer build too many apartments there, which will add to the traffic and the parking and the safety issues. Thank you for listening again. My name is Melinda Biancalana. My phone is 775-742-8636. And I appreciate you letting me leave a message. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi there. For the record, this is Trey Abney representing NAIOP Northern Nevada regarding your Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, November 18th, agenda item 4.1, case number TXT21-0002 on the zoning code. Again, on behalf of NAIOP, I want to thank city staff for working with us well over a year. We've worked productively with city staff on this. 99% of this code is great. The sustainability section, however, as mentioned at your previous workshop, was introduced a little over 2 months ago, and it is not workable. Initial study and calculation shows some major issues with anybody's ability to comply, and will put a chill on commercial development in Reno, especially outside the core areas of our city. This will make every development project in the city of Reno more expensive and make it nearly impossible for small developers to build their projects. The purpose of this code update was to make it easier to understand and comply with, and to make it more objective. This language does the opposite. The city of Reno would be the only jurisdiction in the region to impose these regulations on new development, thereby driving new projects and the tax dollars associated with them to Sparks, Washoe County, Fernley, and Story County. If the purpose of our development code is to reduce trips and vehicle miles traveled, this does exactly the opposite by forcing City of Reno residents to drive to other jurisdictions for work. Businesses in industrial zones are the brightest spot in our current troubled economy, and they pay the highest wages. We are not anti-sustainability, but we need more time to work with the city on a plan that is feasible and will work for everyone. And just to repeat, none of the industrial projects we have run through this matrix meet it. And again, we have worked with staff to improve it, and so it's better than when it was introduced, but still unworkable. So we ask to please support the rest of the code update. We need it, it's important, but to hold off on this piece and give us more time to make a matrix that actually works in the real world for developers. Again, thank you for your time.
And that's it for public comment.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. We'll close public comment for now. We can open up it again after Arlo's presentation if we get some. Arlo, take it away.
Good evening, commissioners. Great seeing you tonight. So this is the planned adoption hearing for the long in the making renovation code update. I was planning to break this into 4 sections and present pretty briefly, focusing on the changes from the workshops at Planning Commission and Council, and then let you discuss each section and then roll into the next, mainly to avoid a very lengthy presentation and a lot of go back time. So if that's workable to the group, I will share my screen and dive right into it. So the presentation's broken up into, as I mentioned, 4 sections. The first 3 chapters we'll deal with first, and then pause for discussion and any recommendations from the commission before we move on. And then at the end of the meeting, kind of do a formal recommendation. You all know the background. This checks off several city council priorities and also a master plan priority initiative. The update's been long in the making, over 2 years now. You've had 12 prior meetings to review the content here, so hopefully nothing is new. We can talk to the public comments a little bit. I don't think we got much that's new, but I can respond to those. And this is planned to be the final Planning Commission hearing before the City Council adoption in December, and then the second reading of the ordinance of City Council is planned early January. So if things stay on track, that's when the code would go into effect. The reference documents, very similar to what you've seen before. I do want to clarify, we had a number of recommendations to insert the Table D, Exhibit D revisions into the code. So that's what you see. It has all the revisions that have been reviewed at prior meetings. There's a clean version as Exhibit A. There's a redlined version as Exhibit B. And we still have the ongoing documents that have been expanded over the course of this process. Exhibit C for the table of public input, Exhibit D for the revisions, and Exhibit E for the potential future project list. And each of those exhibits have grown since you last seen this, with recommendations and changes made since your last meetings. 1801, the general provisions, the focus of the amendments are on the nonconformities as well as the 12-month transition process to the new code. In each of these chapters, I have a table like this outlining, similar to the staff report, the changes that were made at the Planning Commission and Council workshops. Council did have a pretty good discussion of the nonconformities. They rolled back a couple items. One change was to require a conditional use permit for any expansion of a nonconformity in a flood hazard area. This is generally required, but there are some exceptions. But for those items, including single-family homes burning down that are potentially exempt from a conditional use permit to rebuild, this would apply if they're in a flood hazard area. Similarly, there was a little discomfort about the allowance to expand a non-conforming use within the same building. So the council asked that that be removed and we retain our current process, which would be only to allow those expansions with a conditional use permit. The Planning Commission didn't have any changes to this chapter. Sorry, my phone's buzzing at me. Chapter 2, the zoning district chapter. I'm sure you recall the amendments, the consolidation of districts, some very minor changes dealing with the residential and non-residential districts, SPD, PUD, et cetera. No changes were identified in any of the workshops to Exhibit D, or to Chapter 1802, I should say. Similarly, 1803, the use regulations. No changes were identified from the workshops. Now, there were a number of amendments in Exhibit D identified outside the workshops and generally endorsed or not objected to at the workshops. A lot of those focused on some more nuanced provisions for certain areas where mixed use consolidation resulted in changes. So where those were an issue, we have some use specific allowances and requirements to generally retain existing overlay district provisions. And then some other targeted, mainly corrections, but other changes as well as outlined in Exhibit D. So this may or may not be the easier section, but I wanted to kick loose the discussion and any recommendations from the body on these first 3 chapters before we move on to the Chapter 4.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? I'm trying to run through my screen and I don't see any.
I can unshare if you'd like. And I don't believe any of our new public comments address these chapters. I will try to hit on those as we go along.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Johnson. I do have a question, and maybe this is the right chapter or not, because I think this is the one where it's talking about use regulations. We received a public comment today regarding some property up in the North Valleys that was previously in the, I believe, the North Valley Transit Center, the joint use area, with a number of changes identified between what it currently was and what it's been proposed to, some of which seem to be potentially impacting elsewhere. So I guess, Arlo, if you could maybe speak to that. I'm pretty sure everybody saw that list, so I won't go through it, but it was basically what 24-hour operations as well as some potential uses for the site.
Yes, thank you. I should have covered that here. Fundamentally, that's an industrial project in every sense of the word. It's massive, big box warehousing. It's in one of those areas that's master planned industrial, but it was zoned mixed use still. So we plan to be coming forward when we're reviewing the zoning map amendments. We're going to be recommending that that should be an industrial zone, which would be more suitable for the uses that they've identified. It's being converted to mixed use suburban under the conversion table. And the master plan really called out to remove some of those development incentives from mixed use suburban. So the bottom line is those recommendations we do not feel are appropriate in the mixed use suburban zone. But we do think most, if not all, of the concerns will be addressed with the rezoning to industrial coming up here following adoption.
Thanks for that, Arlo. And I guess just a follow-up to that, can you remind me what the anticipated process is or time period for other property owners that may find their land use changes to be a little bit problematic?
Yes, you may recall we didn't want to bundle all those together with the adoption hearing because they should be given due consideration. We plan to process all of those in the next 3 months, or I should say in the first quarter of 2021. So the next 4 months, we'll be bringing them forward in batches, kind of by area. And one of the topics, and this one fits that topic, are properties that were redesignated in the master plan and whether those should be rezoned in accordance with the master plan or not. So this has a master plan designation of industrial, and we'll certainly be recommending it be zoned to industrial within 4 months.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I don't think I have any additional questions on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Arlo, let's move on.
So Chapter 1804 is one of the biggest chapters, and the bulk of comments, not the bulk, but many comments have been received on the development standard chapter. I'll just go through article by article because it's pretty substantive, and then we'll have our discussion on the whole chapter if that works. Natural resource protection, Article 1. We generally stayed out of substantive changes to this section. These topics feature prominently on the future project list, but they're complex and require good consideration. There were some targeted changes and 3 changes identified at the workshops. The Planning Commission change, very timely. I think it was Commissioner Gower recommended enhancing requirements for vegetation management in the urban wildland interface. I think yesterday was a real reminder for why this is very important. 2 other changes suggested at the City Council meeting. The first one is flood mitigation in the critical flood zone. This is the area out East Truckee Meadows, not applicable everywhere, but the critical flood pool. We would increase the mitigation requirement from 1-to-1 or no net loss to 1.3-to-1, consistent with what's being done in the North Valleys. This is also consistent with how projects like Daybreak and some others in that area have essentially been what they've been required to do case by case. The second one is it's pretty nuanced in the wetlands section. There's some additional language similar to the 404 permitting process to prioritize wetland avoidance over offsite mitigation. So basically it goes avoid first, if you can't avoid, mitigate. So if someone's paving over a wetland and proposing to mitigate it elsewhere, they would need to demonstrate that that preserving and avoidance wasn't feasible in that area. Very similar to the federal process. Sustainability has been and continues to be a big discussion topic. I think we got 1 or 2 public comments before this meeting supporting that section and 1 opposing it. The council had a pretty lengthy discussion of it while the Planning Commission supported it. You had some fairly minor nuanced refinements. The council had a pretty lengthy discussion with a lot of testimony. Their big change or recommendation was to make it a voluntary compliance for the first 12 months. So essentially it would be informational gathering. Projects would add up the point total and we'd be able to document and see if they conform or not, but it would not be mandatory for the first 12 months. And the language has it coming back for reconsideration after that 1-year period. In conjunction with that, there was some relaxation of the point requirement focusing on non-residential projects. Mr. Abney spoke to that in his voicemail. and some adjustments to the menu item point totals, generally to make it a little less, less challenging for non-residential projects to meet. Grading and hillside development, Articles 3 and 4. The council is asking that we retain the public hearing requirement for cuts and fills. I'll speak to this a little more in Chapter 8, but that was the recommendation. Article 5 was another council action item, essentially to require disclosures to buyers of properties located on a commercial or a collector or larger street. So there's been some, there have been some issues where people have testified they didn't know they were buying a house on what would become a busy street. And this requires a notification to buyers that your street is a larger roadway, not a residential level street. Article 6 was the Planning Commission change to add emergency access locations to areas where pedestrian connectivity must be provided. Article 7, this is a big chapter, or big article, I guess. Parking, a lot of significant changes. We haven't had a ton of comments about the changes during this last round, though. General support, I would say. The one change is from the council was to remove the trip reduction ordinance from the Title 18 and process that as an amendment to our business licensing codes. So the effect of that would be that compliance would need to be demonstrated with business licenses, not with development projects. I think the rationale was that businesses change over time, and this would be the more appropriate venue for that. Article 8 on landscaping had a addition, relatively minor, to add to landscape plan requirements, an inventory of existing trees. This is generally already done, but it's not clear in code that it is. I think this is a precursor to some more significant amendments being discussed as part of a tree protection ordinance, which is being processed separately. But this would add this articles for residential, mixed use and non-residential. 2 planning commission changes, you may recall. One, then council supported both of those. One was that there would be no density bonus for cluster developments on hillside development projects. Right now you can get a 15% density bonus for clustering. And the second change was to strengthen the incentives for affordable housing through the density increases for multifamily projects with small unit sizes. This was well received, and I think most commenters felt this was pretty close to on target in terms of how strong these incentives should be. Article 12 was really generally unchanged, no changes from the workshops. Article 13, our new dark sky lighting ordinance, also no changes from the workshops. Residential adjacency was the other big debate topic since or even when you last saw this. Really got a lot of emails and comments after the Planning Commission strengthened it a little bit. The council opted to remove this from Title 18 and continue to deal with hours of operation project by project through conditions of approval. There were some concerns about impacts on projects where it may be good to expedite construction, public works projects, et cetera. So this change would retain our current system for regulating hours of construction. In Article 15, another Planning Commission adjustment to strengthen the density bonus from 30% to 45% for affordable housing. I think 1 or 2 of the comments you recently received were involved the sustainability ordinance. And I don't think any of the other recent comments addressed this chapter. Could be missing them, but I don't think so. Happy to answer any questions, discussion, whatever it may be.
Commissioners, discussion?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson. Oh, I saw Commissioner Velto pop in front of me. Why don't you go ahead and take this, Commissioner Velto?
I appreciate it, Commissioner Johnson. So I have a couple questions about the menu for sustainability.
Yes.
So, you know, there was comments, there was a public comment as to there not being any commercial projects that would fit within this menu for sustainability. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, this is, as you know, a big policy discussion topic. It's kind of moved beyond staff recommendations. I think Mr. Abney's point was, you know, the projects as they've been designed in the past would not meet the point total. And we found that that is generally true. They came in a little below the point total. The nature of some of the adjustments were to reduce the point total for non-residential and also add menu items to make it a little easier. But I think it's fair to say our projection is that they'll probably need to add a couple sustainability features to most non-residential projects that aren't located in an infill area. Now, those features they can add, it's 4 or 5 pages of options, and some of them are pretty inexpensive to add. So really, I think that was the intent of the ordinance to start with, to nudge projects towards sustainability. And that's part of the reason why I think the council wanted to collect more information and essentially see what the impact would be on projects for a period of time before moving towards adoption and full implementation.
So I appreciate that explanation. I guess when I look at the language that is put in the code that says that it's revisited in a year, it doesn't seem like it's revisited in a year and it requires an affirmative vote. I view it more as an opt-out where it's just revisited. So is that your impression as to what the language in the code is?
You know, that discussion just came up, I think it was yesterday at our technical working group meeting. It is a little bit ambiguous in the way we wrote it in terms of what happens if, say, we don't come back in 12 months. You know, our commitment was we're going to bring it back within 12 months and ask for a vote on it. But if the commission wanted to change it to make it very clear that it, you know, doesn't go into effect without affirmative action, that could be an adjustment or a different recommendation for that matter. But the clear language is that it will come back in 12 months. We take that as direction and we plan to bring it back in 12 months with a summary of how all the projects how the points added up for each project we'd processed.
How about for, and forgive me, I missed the last meeting we had. I was incapacitated, but this, the meeting prior, we talked about how this would affect residential homes. And I still need some clarity as to how this is going to affect, you know, people that are trying to buy a house. I look on Redfin in terms of houses that are for sale right now under $400,000, and there's maybe 13 houses in the city of Reno. So I'm just really struggling with anything that could affect home prices right now.
Sure, and that again is why the council wanted to collect more information before making this a mandatory ordinance. The numbers that we ran, you may recall, we ran, I think, 8 or so projects through it. The residential projects had a pretty easy time meeting it, even the ones in suburban areas. So it seemed a little more difficult for non-residential to meet it. Also, a lot of the exceptions and point reductions apply to affordable housing. So a 1,500 square foot home is flat out exempt. And then there's other factors that generally make it easier for residential. So our best guess is that when we come back in 12 months, assuming that's how it gets adopted, I think it's going to show that it was not that onerous on residential.
Okay.
We'll have to see.
That makes sense. If the council's given an indication, or I guess it's your impression that it's better to look at this a year from now, why are we designing the code to effectively potentially make this permanent, as opposed to doing a year of research where we require every new development to fill out this like information sheet that tells us whether or not their project would comply? I just struggle with the rationale of putting this into the code now, as opposed to kind of doing a year-long study before we do something that could be very drastic for development.
The flippant answer was because that was our interpretation of what they asked us to do. They basically said, let's keep this, let's have everyone apply. You put something in code if it's an application requirement, but make it non-binding for 12 months. I think either way would work. It does, it tends to be a little easier for a designer to know what's required to have it in code, but we could certainly put it in our application materials and not have it in code for that period of time. Or we could change that language and have, it doesn't go into effect without affirmative direction in the future. I don't know. And maybe council goes in a different direction at the adoption hearing. I don't know that either. It's a topic many people are pretty passionate about.
I appreciate that, Arlo. I thank you for the explanation. Have you heard of are there specific point totals where you heard feedback that you'd like this to be higher and the city chose not to make it higher or not to recommend it at a certain point?
As the staff, because I take this as what staff recommending, we tried to strike a balance. You may recall our earlier discussions involved mandatory features for construction, EV charging in garages, solar panels. A lot of the testimony at that time was it's one size fits all, there's going to be a cost impact, et cetera. So we worked with the consultants to try to find something that kind of eased us into increased sustainability. I'd say this was probably a step, maybe not the final step. So that's really where we came from. We tried to find a balance that did something, but wasn't unduly costly and was particularly sensitive to affordable housing. And I think we came relatively close. From my perspective, we may have made it a little too easy on residential. I think we'll see when we get some projects in. The infill projects basically doubled their point total without doing anything. And the suburban projects, for the most part, met it as well. So as a staff level, we're not overly concerned about the financial impacts of it, but we do acknowledge it will likely require some additional sustainable design features for some projects, especially those in outlying areas.
So this kind of goes back to something I asked a little bit earlier. What do you envision staff will do with the data it collects over the course of this year? Like how will that, and I know you can't really tell me until you see the data, but what do you envision that will be? How will that be presented to the council? How will that be presented to us?
Well, it'll be a massive spreadsheet to start with, and we will try to add graphics and summary information to make it a little more digestible. You may recall Jeff and his team kind of put together a matrix, each item and the point totals and what they added up to. I'm basically envisioning a really big spreadsheet that shows each project and how many points they got for each topic and whether they met the total or not, and then summary information kind of summarizing the consolidated results. It should be a lot because this applies not just to public hearing projects, but to building permits as well. So I expect we're going to have hundreds, perhaps even 1,000 examples over a 12-month period.
Thank you very much for the information. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Comments?
Commissioner Marshall, I know Commissioner Johnson, did you want to go ahead or are you?
I definitely have comments on this item, so as long as you're staying on this item, I'll wait till after you're done.
Okay. This is maybe a question for Carl. You know, this following up on Commissioner Velto's comment. I'm looking at the language proposed for 1804-202A. And it says for a period not to exceed 12 months from the effective date of this title, inability to meet this section shall not be grounds for denial. The next sentence says this section will be evaluated after 12 months to determine whether adjustments are necessary. I read that and I can't tell what's supposed to happen in 12 months. On the one hand, I can read that and it says, the first sentence says it ends in 12 months. So it's effective after 12 months. And then the second sentence just says we're going to evaluate it. It doesn't have any actual control. So I would maybe read this language as saying it automatically goes into effect after 12 months. Is that how you read it?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I think it needs to be clarified by council so that there is a clear understanding as to what it means and what we're going to do at the end of 12 months. So I'll definitely bring that up with council.
Yeah, I'll take ownership of that. I think we probably butchered the language. We thought it was pretty clear that we're going to bring it back in 12 months. And my intent, I think I was the one who typed that in. Maybe it was someone else, but I think it was me. The intent was affirmative action would occur before it becomes mandatory.
So in other words, it's wholly voluntary, or is the information required to be submitted, or it's to be voluntary?
Yes. No, it would be required that they submit the information and add up the point total and show if they meet the total. But if they didn't meet the total, they could proceed. They wouldn't have to change their design.
So in other words, I guess we have language in front of us that doesn't quite match up with, I think, what you're trying to say, which is the language should require affirmative action of the council before it goes into effect.
And a recommendation of planning commission before that action.
Okay. I think I'll probably, Madam Chair, save my kind of overall comments to when we finish up and how this whole thing, how the whole package balances out and in terms of making specific findings. I didn't have any other specific questions on that. I had another question on 1804-706E, the trip reduction section, Arlo. And this is again another key sustainability section that was taken out. I guess the direction is to at some point bring it back as a business license thing, but was there any time limits, or was this just kind of a nice to do out in the future when you find time, or what's specifically supposed to happen with the trip reduction section?
We added it to the Exhibit E list of potential future projects. Right now, there's not a timeline on it. If we were able, we could just say, hey, move it to Chapter 5. That's where it lives. But amendments outside Title 18 require a specific process, including a business impact statement. So it should be a pretty targeted amendment. We would anticipate kicking that loose pretty quickly. And hopefully getting to adoption, within 6 months.
Right now, for us, for making findings purposes, it's just on a potential list.
Yeah, it's not a regulation in the package that's in front of you.
Okay.
You could recommend it be add back in, but not on there.
Okay, that's all the questions I have now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Arlo, circling back to the question about sustainability, I definitely appreciate Commissioner Marshall and Commissioner Velto pointing out some language issues with that. I guess my question is a little bit more procedural. The way this is being discussed and presented to council by a number of parties, and the way it seems to have come out from council is that, you know, we're going to take 12 months of data, put them on a massive spreadsheet, and then just say, look at how many projects can't meet your onerous sustainability requirement. There's no, I guess there's nothing in here that requires somebody to demonstrate how they could meet this. And if the intent, as was originally speculated or brought about to bring the sustainability in there, was that we were pushing for sustainability. And so I can read the tea leaves here from what I've seen in the comments and what I've heard on the comments, that 12 months from now, there's going to be 50 industrial projects or whatever the number is that all demonstrate they can't meet this. And council's going to say, well, obviously then it doesn't work. As opposed to taking the approach of, hey, this project comes short by 4 points, 6 points, 10 points, whatever it is, and pointing out what could be done to make up those points. Certainly moving the building into an urban area isn't going to happen, but I go through these 4 pages of options here, and as you stated in your presentation, there are a lot of things that can be done for little or no cost that aren't currently being done. And so to me, just waiting 12 months to put this into effect and then go through this process over again, saying, hey, the way we're doing things now doesn't meet the code, so change the code to match the way we're doing things now. To me, that's not what we should be doing. To me, this sustainability thing was written in a way that I think is overly generous to any commercial project or residential project, with respect to looking at the overall menu and saying, hey, I don't have this in there now, but if I put it in while I'm building the building, it's pennies on the dollar or it's no cost whatsoever. And so to me, I don't think there's been enough consideration given to, you know, let's wait 12 months and see what happens, because in 12 months, everybody's going to say, look, it didn't work, we couldn't meet it. To me, there should be requirements in here that if you don't meet it, you have to demonstrate what the, you know, looking at it, whether it's part of the permit review process or comments or findings or something that basically say, you know, demonstrate why you can't make it, why you can't meet this, rather than just accepting that they can't. And so I'm not sure how the language goes to say that. I mean, I'm actually opposed completely to the 12-month moratorium. I think we put this into place and see what happens, and let the projects, you know, let there be some questions about, you know, what can be done. I think if you're looking at it in terms of the way we do things now, yes, it's not going to work. The chart that you guys put together demonstrated that. But it also demonstrated that there weren't a whole lot of points required to meet these requirements, especially since they've been reduced by 4, I think, across the board. So, you know, you know, my statement is the way it's set up right now, we're not going to end up getting the sustainability that we want to get out of the construction in the area. It's not a sky is falling kind of thing as would be led to believe. It just requires a little bit more thought and planning and design at the front end. And so I know I've just kind of gone on and I've seen some people nodding off. So I'll stop right now and just say, you know, I don't support the 12-month moratorium. I think we've made enough other changes to add points and reduce the totals that we should be implementing this for all of the projects moving forward.
Yeah, certainly understood. And that was generally your recommendation at the last meeting. I would say though, I didn't really take the tone of the council meeting to be that. You know, I think it was, you know, let's see if it's too easy as well and try to get the number right. But who knows where it's going to go in a year.
But again, there needs to be something in place that requires a review of not just, hey, I've submitted this project and it doesn't make it. The review needs to say, this is what I didn't get, and here's what would have had to happen in order to make it. Because then you're actually giving something for us to review. If you say, look, I have to spend an extra, $2 million in order to implement this, that's one thing. But if you say, oh, well, yeah, I have to add some additional skylights to add my daylighting, and I need to provide a shower so that I meet the requirements for that, and I need to put an EV charging station out there, I've basically just added about $20,000 to a $30 million project. So I have a hard time thinking that this is going to be a problem. So if the language is going to be in there, there needs to be some requirement either at council or from staff as an understanding of how it's going to be presented in 12 months. That's not just up and down. It's, here's all the ones that didn't make it, but here's what could have been done in order to get there and the associated cost. That's basically where I'm coming down on that.
Understood. Makes sense.
Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just follow up on Commissioner Johnson's comments, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that we've put a lot of thought into the whole code, and I think it's worth reiterating that this sustainability menu that's being put forward here isn't something that the Planning Commission or staff or the city kind of pulled out of thin air. It's something that's been vetted in our state, in the city of Henderson. And I'm sure that city of Henderson, when they put it together, looked at best practices and vetted it when they included it into their code. So I think it's important just to take a step back and recognize that. I agree that, in the spectrum of kind of sustainability light to, hey, let's really be innovative and do something about, really tackling climate change and really going after some of the policies that we set in our master plan and our commitments that we've made as a city to, the Paris Climate Accord and the Ozone Advance and all of these other commitments we've made as a city. Here's our chance where the rubber's meeting the road and the code, and we're saying, okay, we want to take this menu approach where we're giving you a ton of options to, meet these sustainability goals for the city, our sustainability policies. Here's these different avenues you can take. There are cities across the country that are taking a much more progressive, I don't want to say heavy-handed because it's not really that, it's the innovative approach to making this happen. So we're not there yet, unfortunately, but this is such a huge step in the right direction. And in terms of a policy process or even like a planning process, you develop your policy based on the best practice and the information that we have available, right? And that's what we're doing right now. We've collected that information. To continue to collect information, like Commissioner Johnson said, was sort of this kind of pseudo code scenario, doesn't really make a lot of sense to me either. In planning or in policy, there's a cycle, right? You put your policy into place, you put your plan into a place, and then you evaluate the outputs of it. How did it work? So really what we should be doing, if we're following that logic, is we put the plan into the code into place, and then in 12 months, in 3 years, we evaluate how it worked. Because like Commissioner Johnson was saying, hopefully it spurs that innovation. Hey, let's, use this option or this menu approach, so we can really see that, yes, this really worked because we use this options. Or yeah, maybe at the end of a year or 3 years, we see that, okay, that, there were these things that don't work, and we make those adjustments. But if we punt on this and we say, you know what, we're really not serious about it, we've got these other, elements in our code, we think that's good enough for now, let's take a look in a year. I agree with Commissioner Johnson that it's just going to be, let's get all of the points in this huge spreadsheet, and yeah, it's show that it didn't work because it wasn't a requirement to begin with. Madam Chair, I really would like to see this move forward. Obviously, I think it's such a critical piece of the code for the city. I don't know if this is the right point to kind of have a discussion about it. If council is firm on this and we don't think as, a commission or just me as an individual planning commissioner, if this is a sinking ship, I would really like to see elements of this menu be extracted out and put into other parts of the code. And I would like to have a conversation on that, because there are so many elements of it that really should be in the code. I appreciate that, the time you gave me there.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. So I guess not to beat a dead horse, but my other commissioners are much more eloquent than I am. I'm just going to be very frank and say, this has been years in the making, many meetings in the making. And to say we're going to give you 12 more months to think about this and see how it works, it doesn't seem like we're easing into it. It seems like we've completely dropped the ball. And I'm going to say, I think council dropped the ball on this. And, that might get me in trouble, but I just think this is ridiculous. And all the other parts of the code, we have told people, hey, you know what? In 12 months, we'll see how it works. And, if you're not liking it, then we can make a revision. But for this piece of the code, we're going to say, you know what? We're not going to do anything for 12 months, and we'll reverse that in 12 months and see if we want to come back and see how it works. So, I'm very disappointed that the decision was made to wait 12 months. And that's about what I have to say.
I will say it's not a decision yet. There hasn't been an adoption, and being, a college graduate, I just counted to 4. So what I'm hearing here is that the Planning Commission will likely be recommending some change to what's in front of you. And you should probably think about what that recommendation should be. Is it just implement it now, or just what you would like to recommend up? Sorry, I didn't want to cut off the other two, but you know how in this world 4 matters a lot.
Yeah. I have a question. I know I've already asked.
Commissioner Velto, I just want to make sure, did Commissioner Olivas or Commissioner Munoz have something to bring to the table?
Yeah, Commissioner Olivas.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, either way, I kind of don't like the ambiguity and even the 12 months kicking the can down the road, whichever way we went. This has been 2 years in the making, and I think I originally liked the argument that maybe it needs to be more affirmative, but at the same time, if the real plan and the master plan and what we're trying to do is to incentivize, I think human nature would be to we're going to have some bias in our data. I think we'll have some bias in our data too on the things that they choose to potentially overstate the cost and to argue it down later. It almost calls for a review by somebody, and I don't know if it's the city would be even able to hire somebody, but it almost takes a designer with the city to work with them and say, well, you could do this or should do that, and kind of coach them through it in an audit of some ways, because we're going to have some bias in the data whichever way we go. So I'm not totally sure which way I go on that. I think kind of if we have 12 months to evaluate it, and getting better data, and then having it automatically go into effect, even that's kicking the can down the road. So I think I concur a little bit more with Commissioner Johnson and Gower on this.
Commissioner Munoz?
Hi, Commissioner Munoz for the record. I understand what the rest of the commissioners are saying, and I do agree to a point. I'm a little bit late to the party where I've only been here for 6 months, so this whole 2-year process, that hasn't been my experience. My experience is different from what most of you have seen, and for me, it's I do see a definite cost. What those exactly are, I have no clue. I don't know what that is. I don't believe any of us or the city has a great idea of what the costs are going to be, and that's why that year is important. I do agree with Commissioner Lupus and Commissioner Johnson. There definitely needs to be some kind of audit. If this does go, a year down the road before it's completely implemented, that bias, which is going to come from both sides, needs to find a middle point. As a police officer, we'd get the story from one person, we get the story from the other person, we'd put those two together, and that'd be the truth. And I believe we need to go about this the same way. And I understand everybody's eagerness to push forward with the sustainability, and I get that. But the cost of this for developers could be huge. It could be huge. It could not be. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know, but I do think implementation to jump in and just do this and say yes, let's go as soon as the council goes and vote on it and make it happen. That just doesn't feel right to me. It feels like we need a little bit more information. At least that's where I'm at. Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Oh,
Yes.
Mr. Galt.
I am really glad that Commissioner Munoz mentioned what he did. I too am not seeing the data backing up a lot of these changes, and that might be because I've been on the commission for a little over a year now. But before we implement a series of serious changes that could really affect industry, I'd want to see what the average cost would be per project. And maybe some of you have seen that data, but I haven't seen it. Our economy is trying to recover from the highest unemployment rate ever. I don't think it makes sense for us to be implementing new regulations that will make it more costly to do business. And until I see our projects where it will be a few $1,000s on a multi-million-dollar project, I don't know if I can be persuaded this is the right option. I think that Commissioner Olivas is spot on in saying that there's going to be bias either way. So I strongly encourage an audit and to look into what developers are doing to make sure that they're not skirting the rules to bias the data. But I see this as something that should be a year-long audit, because I don't know why we put in place a law, say it's not applied for a year, and then say maybe we'll apply it later. And I think we all kind of agree on that premise. We just disagree on the implication. I think that Commissioner Johnson, Gower, Taylor, and Marshall might agree that the implication is that we should say, let's put it in place now and check it later. I think we should not put it in place now, and we shouldn't presume what's going to be the optimal way to regulate sustainability. Instead, we should do a year-long survey with an audit and then put in place a sustainability matrix that fits the needs of our development community to not increase costs. I do want to know though, am I missing some data that I haven't seen that shows that X project's going to cost Y more or something like that?
We did a I'm not going to say it's an exhaustive review. It was a fairly limited review of how the point totals are. You look at some of the other items that could get to the full point total, and some of them are costly and some of them are less costly. What's going through my mind right now in terms of a more deep, I think I'm hearing 4 saying, let's just implement it now. And I'm hearing several of you say, let's look at it, but let's get better data in a year that's more meaningful for us to make a decision. I think we can do that, but I'm sensitive to the administrative costs. I want to do it in a fairly streamlined way if we're going to do it, because we are very strained already. But it might be a type of thing where, ask developers what they would add to meet the point total and have a staff comment box or something like that in terms of whether we agree with that assessment or do we see an easier way. I mean, it's just, this is going to be every building permit, so I don't want to make it add more than, 15 minutes or something to the review, or it's going to eat us alive. So that's kind of what I'm grappling with a little bit.
I hear that.
Madam Commissioner? I'm sorry, I was just going to respond a bit to Commissioner Velto. I think the way that, I don't take it as blind faith that these things can be done in an economical fashion. I guess I rely on past experience. And, the model that this came out of, and it was mirrored on, as I think was pointed out by several people before, was the city of Henderson. So they have this program. They actually have a much tougher program. And somehow they're able to, developers are able to afford to build. Now, I'm not certain if all the economic conditions are right, but this was even watered down from Henderson's, the ordinance they have. And then it was put through, a stakeholder committee, technical advisory group that includes, was a fairly, I think a rigorous examination and went through multiple iterations of what the table looks like, how it could be met. And so there was developer representation on that panel. And they, I'm not certain if it was a unanimous vote to approve it or not, or a consensus or what, but it also came through that panel. And together with staff's work, that to me provides me with the basis to be able to say that this is not a heavy lift. In fact, it's a pretty light lift. And while, you never can be certain when the economic conditions are right to require a little bit more, we also know that a lot of these measures, as we've talked about before, end up with cheaper operating costs for the people who are occupying the residences, or cheaper billing costs for those who are running the business in the building. Not to mention the public health benefits of doing all the things that sustainability does for air quality, for quality of life. So I guess I wouldn't be as, I don't take it on faith that this can be done economically. I rely on that kind of past history of how this was developed and where it came from. It's best practices. So it's not something that's, untested and untried. But I will agree with you, there is no unbiased, or I wouldn't say unbiased, I would say third-party review of the cost of each thing and an analysis like that. If we were to acquire that of everything we do, I'm not certain we'd get a whole lot of progress done on our requirements. But, as we have in the past, reasonable minds may differ.
Okay, commissioners, do you think we can move on to the next section and bring comments back at the end? Have some time to think about it?
Madam Chair, can I just ask a quick question of staff in response to Commissioner Velto's earlier comments? Arlo, when you do a code update like this, do you look at the code comprehensively for cost implications? So, I mean, we've zeroed in on cost implications of the sustainability ordinance, but I mean, do you look at economic implications of implementing the night sky ordinance or additional landscaping requirements or surveillance requirements? I mean, it seems like there are cost implications strewn all throughout the code, positive and negative.
I guess I'd answer that those are considerations that we keep in mind, but it would be virtually impossible to quantify. So we try to keep that kind of cost in balance and try to find less expensive ways to achieve the goals. But to your question, no, we don't know how much the lighting ordinance is going to cost people.
So is the sustainability ordinance any different than those other elements of code in terms of, cost implications, positive or negative?
Well, the discussion's different. Not really, no. And I'm not sure it's gonna be, hey, this is gonna cost an average of $2,021 per whatever. I think it was more to get a feel for, hey, did 80% of the projects meet it as designed, or were they an average of 20 points short, or kind of a order of magnitude type of analysis more than a finance style spreadsheet.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just one last question or comment before we move on this. And again, in response to Commissioner Velto, I guess the question that I pose as somebody who does look at these on a daily basis, I keep hearing all these comments about how much more expensive it's going to be. But I'm not, to your point of us not knowing, I think there's a certain knee-jerk reaction that's happening. There's certainly things in here that are expensive. I think the issue is the 2 or 3 sections in the middle that essentially deal with where projects are at. I think that's the hardest part to, wrap around when we hear the comments about, industrial development. There's just entire sections of this that are, impossible to meet. So immediately you start looking at the other areas and try to come back with that. But again, a deeper dive into it shows that there's not really much to those, and it will vary wildly from project to project. So I guess that was where my concern was in terms of, who's dictating what points count and what points don't count, and what the cost is with them. In looking at the original breakdown that staff provided, the staff provided a breakdown based essentially on where the facilities were located. There was no way for them to go in at a planning level and determine what materials were being used in the building, which there's a ton of points available just for using certain materials. There's information there with respect to shading or daylighting or things that aren't looked at a conceptual phase or even a planning phase with respect to entitlements. So part of my thinking when I saw that was, yes, if you look at where a building is at, it's going to be more challenging to meet this requirement if you're not in the urban core. But all of the approach that's been taken with this number of different options makes it much more feasible for any project to find a balance in terms of how to get to the admittedly limited numbers that we're requiring here. So I can't say with certainty that it's not going to cost, but I can tell you from experience on projects outside of the urban core that had to meet more stringent standards for LEED, that the greatest cost involved was for the designers to actually go back through and document every single thing that went into the building. It wasn't the actual cost of the building, it was the cost of the administrative side. And that brings me all the way back, just to wrap this up, Madam Chair, to my comment to Arlo from the very beginning, that there are a number of things in here that I don't think are problematic for the builders or the developers to meet, but I think they are going to be very interesting for staff to figure out how to actually accept that they're happening, because as I said, nobody lists what their recycled content of the carpet is at building permit. So you could be claiming points that you can't actually demonstrate until the very end. So I strayed all over the place there. I apologize for that, Madam Chair. I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Arlo, I think we're ready for you to move on, if you're still with us.
Madam Chair, before we move on, since we're still in this section, can I just say that we received an extensive number of public comment today about a section that was added in here just before the sustainability area with respect to wild horse management. I believe that's in this chapter right in front of the sustainability ordinance.
Oh my gosh, did I fail to put that in the presentation?
It was so
Yes.
when there was a whole section here, so I just want to make sure we don't skip that.
I apologize for that. I think I kept it out of the PowerPoint. That recommendation or that direction from council mirrored, it's the wild horse issue and, or feral horses in this area. How do we essentially keep them out of the urban area? And they had applied some conditions of approval to the daybreak tentative maps that had been worked out between the horse advocates and the developers that enhance fencing requirements and gate requirements and things like that. So that has been added into the code as more code appropriate language so that projects that have access to the Virginia range, which is where the horses are, would need to have enhanced fencing and gates and things and monitoring and things like that. This overall issue is also on the future project list because a code requirement it's going to help in a few areas, but it's fundamentally not going to keep horses off the streets. The bulk of it really needs to be a more comprehensive barrier of sorts. So that was added, future works planned on the future work list. And I do apologize for leaving that off the presentation. I don't know how I missed that one.
Anything else before we move on? I'm afraid to say it, but Arlo, I think you can move on.
Okay, and we'll do a recommendation at the end. Well, I hear the sustainability is probably going to be the main one out of this chapter. Screen share coming back on. As you probably recall, the sign ordinances are very minor, modest changes, basically to address legal requirements. This is also on a potential future project list. No changes emerged from the workshops on this chapter. Come on, screen. There we go. And 1806 was also generally a no change chapter. Historic preservation, there was a lot of discussion at the council workshop. I think that you may recall that there's a suite of changes pretty specifically spelled out in the master plan. The Historic Resource Commission had supported it with 3 changes. Those are wrapped in. The Planning Commission had supported it. The council supported it as well. The biggest discussion item was whether or not to do away with the overlay district. Commissioner Breckus in particular was concerned that there may be some sort of streamlining or making it easier to undesignate or notification concerns. The council as a whole did not direct changes. Jeff did follow up with quite a few members of the HRC, and they continue to support that streamlining as a way to encourage listing. So no changes were recommended to 1807 through either of the workshop processes. Any discussion on these topics? Next one's the other biggie. Hearing none, I'll roll right into 1808, the process requirements. Just as a reminder, kind of the substantive changes shown on this table, we have some additional processes on the public hearing side, as well as the enhanced administrative side, both of which have public notification, conditions of approval, and appeal rights. This is really the list of the targeted process streamlining that's in the final document. The relaxation for improvement to nonconformities, that got brought back a little bit, but that still makes it a little easier to expand a non-conforming single-family home or rebuild after a fire or other calamity. Grading and hillside development, we are retaining, per the council, direction on, or streamlining the process for hillside developments under 10 acres in size, but we will be retaining the conditional or the major site plan review for cut and fills. Residential adjacency, site plan review versus special use permit, but broader applicability to not just be for adjacency, but also within 150 feet. And it has the exception for smaller projects across major arterials. Minor additions to small buildings, a very nuanced change to help small businesses. The 20,000 square foot cap to go straight to a building permit stays in place, but it increases from 10% max to 20% max. The thresholds for discretionary review of multifamily projects in certain districts increases. And then late night activities. Now for indoor activities in the urban districts, more than 300 feet from residential, they would not need discretionary review, indoor only. And then targeted changes to the land use table. So this is really the suite of process streamlining right here on this slide as a result of the draft that's in front of you. You may recall we sent out a memo you had asked for on how would this change the process requirements for recent projects. The team went back for a full year and checked every project that was triggered by one of these topics that are being streamlined. The initial review found that all of them retained the same process except 3, and each of those 3 still had the enhanced administrative with public notification. Now that we have cut and fill or conditional use permits back, that's down to 2. So the streamlining would have affected 2 projects that you've seen over the last year. The updated findings are changed. SPD zoning is back, but with added criteria, a considerable number of new standards for PUD districts, annexations to generally require concurrent review, and expanded historic documentation requirement for older buildings. So there was a lot of discussion at the council meetings, as there were at the planning commission meetings, and it ended with no changes, although there were requests to, well, the change on cut and fill, that was in a different chapter, but it's related to this. And there was a request to bring back for further consideration at a later date, different options on appeals, call-up procedures, and boundary surveys. You may remember those were the 3 memos. There was some interest in different call-up and referral options, which this group hadn't discussed that much in your review. I think that was 1808. 1809 is a pretty simple one, the rules and definitions. No changes emerged from the workshops. Turn it back to the commission for discussion or questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner Velto?
Yes, thank you. Arlo, there was a letter sent in on behalf of North Valley's Commerce Center. And it dealt with, in part, amendments to section 18.08.605 and some other sections of code. Do you have any comments on that, the content of that letter and the concerns that North Valley Commerce Center's regulation is going to change to affect the businesses that are housed in that center?
Yes, that was it. I think Commissioner Johnson brought it up at the beginning of the meeting. This site is one of those that's master planned industrial. The zoning conversion goes from mixed use North Virginia Transit Corridor to mixed use suburban, but it is a true industrial project in every sense of the word. So we're going to be coming back with you or to review the maps in areas like this, along with different requested areas. Our definite recommendation is this should end up zoned industrial, and those meetings will occur within the next 4 months. So we don't support adding back all these industrial uses into mixed use suburban, but we do support industrial zoning on this property.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Madam Chair, may I?
Commissioner Marshall?
Arlo, a constituent inquiry about drive-throughs and level of review. Are they required special use permits, or are there any changes being proposed for drive-throughs?
Yeah, that's a short question with kind of a long answer. We've added locational standards that are more consistent. Right now, it's kind of a patchwork of where you can do drive-throughs and where you can't. We've differentiated restaurant drive-throughs to other types of drive-throughs like banks, and it's generally more restrictive for restaurant drive-throughs. In the urban areas, restaurant drive-throughs would generally not be allowed. Downtown, mixed-use urban. We've updated the development standards applicable to drive-throughs to generally require additional stacking length for the restaurants to avoid, cars spilling out onto the street while they're waiting for their cheeseburger, which is sounding really good right now. But overall, I don't think the review process has changed significantly. I can flip to that section of code just to double check. Jeff, did you have anything to add? Did I miss anything on that?
I think the key question is, should we, because of, they can push impacts outside of structures into adjacent businesses or residential areas, and whether or not there should be a public hearing for drive-throughs. Is that the request was to have make them special use if they aren't already?
So the way oh, sorry, Jeff, did you want to answer?
Yeah, no, I thought you were still searching. I already had it up. So perfect. You can go right ahead, Arlo.
All right, I'm on a roll. Generally in the mixed use areas, it's a minor conditional use permit, so it would be publicly noticed and appealable, but it would not be a public hearing requirement. The one exception to that is, I'm speaking for the non-food service now, is generally a minor conditional use permit. So a bank drive-through, a pharmacy drive-through, allowed in general commercial, minor CUP, and the other mixed use districts where allowed, and also allowed in the industrial districts. With food service, we're at a conditional use permit, a public hearing in the downtown areas where it's allowed, and mixed use urban. It's goes to a minor CUP in general commercial, and that's generally intentional to try to steer those away from the urban corridors to the more traditional commercial areas. And it's minor CUP in mixed use suburban, and it's allowed by right in general commercial. So it's kind of a tier where in our urban areas, it requires a planning commission public hearing. In more suburban areas that are commercially zoned, it's generally allowed. And we also did enhance the screening requirements near residential. So there's additional regulations for screening. So as I said, there's a very long answer to a very short question.
And if it would fall under, for residential adjacency, it would fall under the new rules for residential adjacency?
Yes, that would also be the enhanced administrative process if it's within 150 feet of a residential zone.
Thank you. And just you said the first category was a public notice and appealable. Was that like a newspaper notice, or was that within certain X number of feet would be the notice?
It's both. It's the exact same notification as we do for the planning commission hearings. So it's newspaper, it's site posting with the big boards, and it's 750-foot radius or 30 properties.
Thank you.
Whichever, well, both.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I don't see any, Arlo.
Madam Chair, before we move on, sorry, I was trying to get to my unmute button.
There is.
I was trying to move him on before you got there.
I know, sorry. Arlo, I wrote something down while you were talking, and I was just trying to figure out what exactly it was. There was a comment about a small building minor addition up to 20% or 20,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's a super nuanced change. The code right now allows minor additions to approved projects without a new conditional use permit. So you could add on a small amount to an existing project. The cap right now is 20,000 square foot for that addition or 10%. So those are both caps. So that allows, you know, a 200,000 square foot building to add on 20,000 square feet. That's a little more onerous for the smaller buildings, the smaller businesses. So we kept the 20,000 square foot unchanged, but now the max is a 20% addition. So say a 3,000 square foot restaurant could add 20% as opposed to just 10%.
Okay, I think the issue was maybe it was just the way I read the PowerPoint where it basically said small buildings addition, and I was trying to figure out how you could have a 20,000 square foot addition to a small building. So
it's really the percentage change is what hits a small building. Sorry, it's
understood. No, it was just a quick question. And then, Madam Chair, I had a question that, and maybe it's a procedural one for how we want to go through this, but there's a couple of items in the code that weren't changes in this section, but that I had a question and wanted Planning Commission to at least maybe discuss as a part of our review of this section. So I guess before I jump into that, I wanted to ask if now was the appropriate time, if there was a different time to do that.
Sure, if it's in the section, I think that's appropriate.
Okay, so I have two sections. One of them is the section under annexations, which is the 1808-401. The reason I bring this up is right now, the way the code's written currently and the way that it's proposed with no changes is that annexations essentially go directly to City Council. My question on that, however, is when you look at the findings and you look at the requirements for annexations, they're very similar to the findings that we make on most of the development projects that we look at. So to me, it seems appropriate that when the city is considering annexations, that Planning Commission input and recommendations to council should be a part of that process. As it's stated right now in there, there is some discussion about concurrent submittals, and quite often we'll see zoning code or master plan amendments come in, but they're after the property has been annexed. So just looking at it from a procedural standpoint and the responsibility of this body and the expertise that we're providing to council, to me, it seems as a part of that review process that the annexation should come to Planning Commission to make the findings and make a recommendation similar to a master plan amendment. I'm not suggesting we be the arbiter of that. I'm just suggesting that should be part of the process. So that was the first item. I have another one, but I'd like to maybe pause there and see if either staff has any comments on that or if my fellow commissioners have any thoughts about that.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Marshall. I swear I did not pay Commissioner Johnson to make those comments. I've been doing it for years, but I would be fully in support of that kind of change. I think Arlo has probably have a response to that, given that we've put that in front of the City Council a couple times, I think, and and they have not bitten yet, but maybe third time's the charm.
That's probably appropriate. We don't have any comments for or against that proposal. It's a policy decision. If the commission wants to recommend that up, I know this has been recommended in the past and I don't think was endorsed. I do know that the process we use now has been in place for at least a couple decades when I started working here previously. But if the commission wants to recommend that up, that's what you're here to do.
Other commissioners' thoughts?
Madam Chair, I'll weigh in. I would also support that recommendation. And I think the point that Commissioner Johnson made, that it's, relying on the expertise and the experience of the commissioners and the other projects and, master plan amendments and zone code changes that we look at, there's information that we can provide that will just help inform the process. And it's really a value added piece to the decision-making process.
And this is Commissioner Marshall again, it really is a recognition that annexation is one of the fundamental planning, while it legally affects the city boundaries, it has some of the greatest impacts on how our city is planned and grows. And so I think it really does fall within our expertise in terms of just giving a recommendation to the city council.
Other commissioners?
Commissioner Olivas. I agree with the thinking, and it'd be good for us to see, but if they've shot it down a couple times already, I mean, that's what they want. I hate to really put it forth again and muddy the waters on other things. Sometimes just give your boss your recommendation and give it to him again and then do what he wants. So they've shot us down before, and I agree with the idea, but I would be reluctant to do it again.
Other commissioners?
If we say it in a different way, can we phrase it differently so we can?
If you could send cookies.
Yeah.
We'll just include it in the matrix for sustainability.
I was gonna say, if they give us sustainability, they can have annexation, but that's probably not gonna work. I guess my thought is I don't have strong feelings about it one way or another. If they've said they're not interested in having us look at it, council, I would tend to think that's probably the way they're thinking. And it seems like there are some expertise that we might be able to lend, but there's a bigger financial picture that we might not have the resources or the expertise to weigh in on that.
And I appreciate the comments, commissioners. That was why I wanted to bring it out there. And I do think to the comment about this has been brought up before. I think I'm in year 6 and I only remember the conversation once, and it was an offhanded remark during a joint meeting. So as far as a formal request of council, I know one has never been made from this body to this council. So I would not think that we're barking up the same tree if we were to list that as a suggestion as a part of our review here. So, and then Madam Chair, one other item, and this one's less of a request and more of a question of staff and Carl as well. In looking at section 1808-707, which is the abandonment one, I'm not necessarily recommending any additional review or comment from that end. I guess I'm just questioning the findings for abandonment. Essentially, the process of abandonment is turning over public way to a private entity. And the only finding that's in that is that the public will not be materially injured by the proposed abandonment. And I've got 3 attorneys on this call, so somebody's going to be able to have a better understanding of that than me. But it definitely seems like when you're abandoning a street or a parcel or anything of that sort, there's a lot of maybe land use, traffic, and planning issues that come into play that should be included as findings, rather than essentially something that's financial and not very clear in terms of what the public being materially injured. I mean, I think there's a hard enough question in terms of who has standing on stuff. So now what's the materially injured part of it? So I guess looking at staff rather than commission on this to try to see if maybe there's some research into best practices of what other places have done, or if the attorney's office has looked at it and seen any potential issues with the admittedly vague findings compared to all of the other findings that we have on just about everything else in this chapter. So I wanted to throw that out there. Maybe staff or Carl can weigh in on this, and then have the commissioners maybe make a comment as well.
Well, I'm sure Arlo can add some additional comment on this, but my recollection is that this finding comes right out of NRS, and that's about the only finding that's contained in the NRS, and that's why it's incorporated in our code. Do you have anything else, Arlo?
No, that's correct. And it is a broad finding. Certainly traffic impacts would be a legitimate consideration to say it doesn't meet it. But yeah, it's state law language, and like some of our other findings, I think for zoning map amendments, we largely copy and paste out of state law. This is also one that goes straight to council, as I'm sure you're aware.
But I mean, that's not to say that I wouldn't, or council wouldn't entertain additional findings if you had any recommendations.
There are instances in the code or the code of ordinances where additional factors are provided where there's statutory guidance. And this could be one of them. There, at least Commissioner Johnson, in my experience in dealing with a few abandonments, the city has exercised significant discretion in whether to accept an abandonment or not. And sometimes it is quite honestly difficult to distinguish between one is acceptable and another is not. And I'm not certain that although we could work at coming up with some further criteria to articulate when is an abandonment appropriate, that is not something that I think we can come up with tonight.
I can say that in other cases where council has considered abandonments, they do look at circulation, they look at the impact to the other residences, and so it is kind of a broad review of the reason for the abandonment, and so it's not just simply looking at whether or not the public is going to be injured. So I agree with Commissioner Marshall that it is a little bit more of a broader review of the issue.
Am I here? I'm sorry. Are we talking about adding conditions for council to look at for something we don't even see?
Madam Chair, I'm posing the question because this is something that has come before council, and since the whole text amendment is being looked at broadly, I'm just raising this as an issue, not something that I think needs to come before this body. I'm just saying that it seems to me that, we have specific findings in, things like a minor conditional use permit that seem more appropriate to an abandonment than just the, consideration that's here. I'm not proposing that we be the ones to add the findings. It was more a question of staff, which was answered in terms of where the findings came from. But I guess in terms of looking at things, there are some, just simple findings that we're used to making with respect to, is it compatible with surrounding development? Is it consistent with the applicable development standards? Looking at the adjacent areas, I'm not necessarily advocating for any specific conditions. I was just questioning why they seem so sparse for this item when it's essentially the public giving away land, and the considerations as to why that would happen seem to be admittedly vague. So it was a point of discussion. I'm not making a recommendation other than to put some awareness out there and maybe pose the question for staff if there's additional comments that need to be made moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll just provide one more comment on that. From my perspective, at least, abandonments are not a development decision. It's kind of a land disposition decision. So I would not think they would be like, a conditional use permit of is the building scale appropriate, that type of thing. It would be more if we were going to add findings, impacts on circulation, impacts on access, future property needs, rather than kind of construction related findings.
Arlo, this Commissioner Olivas, I'd be curious, how many, since we don't see them, I don't have a good idea, how many abandonments are there in any given year?
We've been seeing quite a lot, primarily alley abandonments to facilitate redevelopment and kind of parcel consolidation. I think I just signed off on a staff report for the December 2nd council meeting. That one was a follow-up item to the Pine Street project that you reviewed. So I don't know, Angela, maybe probably a dozen a year or something?
Yeah, this last year and this year, I bet we had 10 to 14 abandonment applications come in a year.
The abandonment of actual streets is much rarer. Sometimes it's a slice of a street, but most often it's an alley. And we also do an administrative process, which no one really ever sees at this level for utilities and things of that nature. There's an administrative process if a sewer easement isn't needed or to relocate.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gower.
I don't want to suggest findings that council has to make either, but I think the benefit of findings are, and including them in the code, is that it gives the public an awareness of the considerations that are being made during the decision-making process. And like Carl mentioned, if council is doing this broader review beyond just this one finding, then it may be a good thing to include a few of those additional considerations that are done anyway, and just list those out in the code so that the public is on notice of, some things to be aware of. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up.
Well, are we ready to try to corral a recommendation?
Sure.
Well, what I heard were three major topics of discussion plus one additional, the sustainability is a big topic of discussion. The review process for annexations, the findings for abandonment. There was less discussion, but some mention of trip reduction ordinance. That's what's on my notes. So you have 3 or 4 topics that are potentially up for a recommendation to modify.
So Arlo, we had one public comment about Article 14. It was the conditions for construction. We got a letter. And I just wanted to confirm that if the construction hours are not going to be included in the zoning code, which sounds like they won't, they will still come individually with the projects and can be part of conditions.
Yes, and I'd like to be specific on this. Our intent would be through discretionary review processes to look at it case by case, similar to what we do now. And if there's residential nearby, look at conditions of approval. I'd like to get the conditions of approval more consistent, kind of almost a standard condition for certain circumstances, dealing with nighttime pours and things like that. Now, what this will not apply to is projects that don't have a discretionary review process. If it's minor enough to go straight to a building permit, we would have no mechanism to impose conditions. So that's how it would look. It would probably, the result would be pretty similar to what you're seeing right now as projects come through. Some of these industrial projects that are near residential, you will see conditions of approval recommended.
Okay, thank you. That was my last question for clarification. Commissioners, other questions or comments before we start?
Madam Chair, can I just follow up on that real quick? So Arlo, there's no place in the code that puts restrictions on hours of operation?
Oh, this is, yes, there's hours of operation.
Sorry, hours of construction, I misspoke.
Not directly. There's noise and odor and those types of regulations that would apply everywhere, but nothing that says you have to shut it down at 8 p.m.
And that was the intent of council pulling it out of the recommendation we were doing, or was there some misunderstanding in terms of, the discretionary review versus the standard construction operations?
I hesitate to speculate on motives, so I'm not gonna, but what was, a lot of what was stated is I can't remember who, but there were several statements of, if it isn't broken, why are we trying to fix it? That I think there was some feeling that the process we're using now is generally adequate and working.
Okay, so at this time, I think maybe we should try and decide what we want to revise or include based on the top 3 or 4 things that Arlo brought up, unless there's any other concerns or questions that we need to address.
I think that sounds good. So if we could take sustainability first, just do them in order. I heard 4 of you say we want the ordinance to go into effect now. I heard pretty much everyone agree that if it doesn't go into effect now, there should be some modification to the language in terms of what that evaluation would look like and some sort of affirmative, it will come back. So that's what my notes have. I guess maybe it's a motion is in order.
You know what? I wonder if we need to take public comment. Angela?
No, because this is a regular planning commission meeting and not a workshop format, we're not taking any live public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that, Arlo.
Madam Chair, can I just state that we did receive public comment during the meeting and all of the public comment have been forwarded to you and to staff for the record.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Arlo. Go ahead.
Well, I think I said my thing. I feel like it's for the commission to make a recommendation at this point.
Madam Chair, if I may start discussion. I know we had a lot of discussion on the sustainability piece. Do you mind if I?
No, not at all. I want to make sure that, again, we did talk quite a bit about it. So if we can start getting to language and decisions to give to Arlo so we can move it forward, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I specifically didn't want to articulate too much about my specific concerns, but just looking at the update holistically, and quite honestly, I think one of the commenters, I think Trey, said it pretty well from the developer's perspective that 99% of the code update is great, except this 1% thing that they have issues with, which is the sustainability. And I think we need to look at it that way. And I think maybe Commissioner Gower was mentioning this a little bit about this update has a lot of bennies and it has some asks. And a couple of those asks were, from my view, the sustainability provision and the trip reduction ordinances, which if you look at the master plan and particularly if you start with PIB, which says you need to update your master plan, your development code to align with the master plan. And then you look at the various provisions of the master plan, which really do aggressively talk about sustainability in the design principles sections of SD. But in particular in the 2.5 of on page 30 of the master plan or policy 2.5 about specific renewable, sustainable practices that direct us to take those into account. And I, for one, believe that these are integral to our ability to make the finding that this update is consistent with the master plan, one of the key findings that we have to make. And without it, I am unable to do so. And otherwise, we're just leaving these aspects alone. I support the suggestion of Commissioner Gower if somehow the least we can salvage is some of these provisions and put them back in the code, not in the sustainability chapter, but as just development requirements. I think that's an option, but I really think in the first instance, we should make a specific recommendation, and as part of our ability to make the findings, that the sustainability and the trip reduction ordinances go back in and they're effective. I find it a little, troubling also just specifically, kind of Commissioner Velto on the money side and the cost side is that there are elements of this that do save costs in efficiencies and in, decreased procedural requirements, going to, not having to go to 2 public hearings or even any public hearings saves money. And so I think you need to look at the economic impact holistically. And so I would urge us to move towards making a recommendation, a strong recommendation to the City Council that the sustainability provisions go into effect and that the trip reduction section stay in, or at the minimum that there is specific direction that it be incorporated into the business code and that effort not be just a potential, but an actuality. So that would be my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. How does that, Arlo, how would that look for a motion? Do we add a condition or a revision?
Yeah, what I'm looking for is, hopefully a recommendation to adopt with revisions. And this would be this would be revision. So yeah, I think you should take a vote on that. Do you support revising the draft that's in front of you in that manner?
Commissioner Marshall, did you want to try a motion there?
Well, I guess I would like, and Arlo, tell me if this is inappropriate, but I guess I would like to make the motion to recommend the package, because I think that's how we should look at it. I know that, there's only a couple other things that there are some questions about. Maybe we can have a little bit of discussion on that, Madam Chair, and then I can make a motion on the full package.
Sounds good, commissioners.
Commissioner Olivas, just to clarify before we move on the others, I guess, so we're talking the motion to implement now versus what the council's brought back to us as, which I understand there's language uncertainty, but I understand that their intention is that it it gets approved, it's deferred for 12 months, but then it goes into effect, or to make it an affirmative, and go into effect affirmatively by the city council in 12 months. And if it doesn't get approved in 12 months, then it doesn't go into effect. Or those kind of our three options, I guess. Okay. And I brought out the whole concept of an audit or staff review or whatever, and that may be too difficult to really implement. But and if I could have the perfect world, I think I'd say 12 months automatically in effect, have that process and the audit for review to get the data. I don't know how practical that is, but I'm kind of reluctant to go against city council too much since that's what they've kicked back to us. So I would prefer more of a 12 months, gather the data, and then it goes into effect without affirmative action.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Velto?
I absolutely agree with Commissioner Oliva. And you know, even told you the concerns I have with the cost this will have on development, and why I think this is a bad idea to do now without having all the data as to how it'll actually affect the cost of creating new jobs, of developing, residential. All of that is a huge concern. But the bigger concern here is that the council's already told us that they do not want the idea of it being implemented right away. And this makes it so if our suggestion is merely to pass this and require that it's implemented immediately, they're going to ignore us. Instead, we should propose language that actually will change something. We should all agree to change the language to make it so instead of it being ambiguous in the code, it requires affirmative consent, or at least we can clarify what the language is and what the requirement is after 12 months. Otherwise, we're not going to be doing anything to help advance this code. We're just going to do what we did last time. The council's going to say no, and we're going to have no effective input in making sure the code is clear. So I think that we should listen to what council has said and operate within those confines of their sending it back to us. Otherwise, we're not going to have any input in this code.
Yeah. Commissioner Levis, just kind of, I think we've got a slight difference in our point there. Mine would be to no affirmative. I mean, take it as I understand, although it's not clear, but my understanding is that it goes into effect in 12 months. And it's a 12-month abatement, but then they know what's going to happen. And I think that is a bit of middle ground to Commissioner Johnson's, that we need to push this forward. I think it needs to be defined, it needs to be certain, and that might be the comment period before. And depending on the comments that City Council gets back, they could change it. But I think that in the absence of change, it should still move forward.
So I understand that perspective as well. I guess we disagree on whether it should be presumptive it continues or presumptive it does not. It seems like the council's directive's been to presumptively make it so it doesn't automatically be implemented. But I still think that we're wasting a vote if our action is to mandate it goes into effect right away, and it's a lost opportunity for us to actually change the code to make it so the council will actually consider it, because we have a directive from them saying they don't want it to be put in place right away. And if I understand there's a couple of votes, there's enough votes here, it seems like, to pass it and have it go into effect right away. I think you should ask whether or not what the effect is of that and what that vote means, other than just showing that that's what you support, when we can actually change the code in a way the council might be taken into account.
Chair.
Commissioner Gower.
Commissioner Velto, I respect your opinions and your comments, and I know you put a lot of thought into this, but I wholeheartedly disagree with the approach and the line of logic that you're taking on this. It's the Planning Commission's prerogative to provide City Council with a recommendation based on our expertise. Whether or not Council agrees with that is a different issue. The decision space that they're giving us is their recommendation back to us. We have complete jurisdiction and our prerogative to provide them a recommendation back. And the recommendation is that from my perspective, we're implementing what's in our master plan. We're giving them an opportunity, a path forward to implement what they've agreed to do. Now is the chance to do that. We're amending Title 18 right now. Why put it off 12 more months? And Madam Chair, I'm prepared to take bits and pieces out of this menu and put them into other parts of the plan. Commissioner Velto, if you want to spend a couple hours going through that exercise, I'm happy to do that, and I'm prepared to do so if you think that'd be more effective. But I think your concern is that the elements in this menu have cost implications. And to my point in my question to Arlo earlier, everything in this code has cost implications. That's what building codes do. That's what zoning ordinances do. They determine the look and feel of development. So it's, I don't agree with you on this. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, just to follow along, because Commissioner Gower pointed out something that I think is interesting from the development side of things, with respect to not just the code. One of the issues that happens in the design industry every 3 years is that there's a new building code that comes out that tells you what you have to do from a life safety standpoint, from a material standpoint, from a site development standpoint. And every time it comes out, it costs more money to build. The structural engineering requirements change, the energy efficiency, all of that changes. It costs more every single time. And the building department here looks long and hard at that and does their own updates, regional, local updates, try to keep it consistent between Reno and Washoe County and Sparks. But it's not a question of, are we going to do this? It's a question of what do we need to do that tailors it to, our community, because this is what needs to happen. And to me, this is that same thing. We've been tasked with updating Title 18, and it's going to change the way that building happens in Reno, development happens in Reno. It's just a fact. And we, through this process, are tailoring that to our community. And the issue of sustainability is one that the city of Reno started championing. I knew I was going to say that word wrong. Pushing for years. They incorporated it in the master plan. They put a sustainability action plan together. All of this has happened while we've been doing this. So this is a commitment that the city has made. And to go back to Commissioner Gower's point, we would be incredibly remiss as the appointed body doing the, recommending development in this community to not specifically state what we're thinking, regardless of whether council agrees with us. I would never want to work for a boss that didn't appreciate my opinion, that didn't agree with theirs, as long as it was a well-informed opinion based on my expertise. And my expertise on the issues of sustainability, I will lay odds is far greater than anybody on backup whatsoever that make my opinion less valuable just because they said it. I take offense to that. I mean, I think this is the way to go. I think it's been watered down beyond where it should have been, but I'm willing to accept that because that's, what this, particular community wants. But for us to just keep punting the sustainability down the road in the Title 18 when we've already put it into plan for the master plan and the sustainability action plan, there's no way I would go forward without recommending that based on my expertise and why I'm on this board. And I'll get off my soapbox now because I think there's a couple of other items that we can be talking about.
Okay, so commissioners, I think we all have strong feelings on this, and we could probably debate it for many more hours, which I'm sure Arlo would be happy to do. but I'm wondering if we can come to a place where we put some language together for a motion and see what happens. I would say I'm definitely in support of what Commissioner Johnson, Marshall, Gower, and Olivas are saying. So I'd like to keep this forward moving if possible.
Madam Chair, I'm ready to make a motion if you're looking for one specifically on Article 2 here in Chapter 4 for sustainability. Is that what you're asking for?
Well, Arlo, do you want a whole, you don't want to take it by article, do you?
Well, Commissioner Marshall wanted to talk about it in totality. I just wanted to add that we will convey minutes in detail and kind of the tenor of the discussion. It's almost like a minority opinion you'd get out of a court that we may be seeing here. So I'm fine either way. If you want to take it topic by topic, make a motion. If you'd rather talk about these next couple topics and do one big motion, we're here to listen and try to document it as best we can.
I think it would be cleaner if we did one motion. That being said, what other things does this commission want to recommend, change, talk about in that motion? And in that meantime, Commissioner Gower, you can start putting together some language for the sustainability portion.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to do that. And, I just want to bring up one thing, and it's related to sustainability. It's an item in the menu. It's the language that was included more recently in this draft regarding the EV charge ready infrastructure for buildings. This is something that we tried to do through conditions. Originally, it got pretty much deferred to Title 18. Frankly, regardless of whether the sustainability menu moves forward, I would really like to see this language extracted. It could be included in the menu too, but I think it needs to be a component of code, a required component of building development. So I would just throw that out there. I know I probably should have brought it up earlier, but I just wanted to indicate that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Other considerations, commissioners? I think our two other topics.
And the others were two in the process section, the annexation and the abandonment findings. It might be cleanest just to make recommendations on topics at this point, unless Commissioner Marshall wanted to weigh in on those.
No, I just from my kind of reading of the tenor, I think abandonment is a bit of a bite to take off at this point in terms of coming up with something, Commissioner Johnson, that we can get for the specific findings. Annexation, I think, is just one where, if the maker of the motion, Mr. Commissioner Gower, if you want to include that, you kind of heard, that would just be a simple bringing annexations before the Planning Commission. And where did we end up on the discussion on hours of operation? Harlow, was that another outstanding issue?
Well, certainly you could recommend, as it sits right now, it will not be in Title 18. It would be dealt with project by project through conditions.
I guess I'd look for discussion among the commissioners whether we want to do something about that, or save our ammunition for sustainability.
I'll talk to this because I think I was one of the main people that brought it up last time. I'm fully okay with it being part of a condition, if that's what works for, staff, the hours of construction operations. That's my opinion. So I guess I'd rather save all my ammunition for sustainability.
Yeah. Commissioner Olivas, I feel the same. I was for keeping it out, which, so I guess that's what I was for at the time, the way it is. But again, it came back to us different than the commission voted. So that's again, city council's intent, and how many of these do we want to turn around back on them?
Yeah, just my 2 cents. I'd like it back in. It is odd that, construction is an industry, or it is a business, and we have hours of operation for most businesses. So I'm not certain why we don't, for this kind of business, it is, in some sense transitory. And so you can have different, it's not going to be a long-term impact in one location, unlike other, businesses, but it is a business. And so it's not unreasonable to have an hours of operation that, particularly when it's adjacent to residential areas. But this is not the hill I want to die on.
Okay.
Continuing with my ammunition analogy.
We might
Madam
have
Chair?
some clarification. So I was going to ask Commissioner Johnson what your feelings are regarding annexation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, I was bringing it up as a discussion item for the commission to see what the tenor is. I think it's a good idea. Obviously, there's financial implications with annexations that are above what we're doing, but I do think there's other issues with respect to services and circulation and that we could weigh in on. So to me, it seems like a good recommendation to make, but it's not we've been operating for as long as we have without it. And I think we process probably far fewer annexations a year than we do abandonments. So I don't know that this is something that we're seeing much anyway. So I like it in there as a recommendation, but I don't think it's anything that would keep me from making any of the findings moving forward on this text amendment. Thank you for asking, Madam Chair.
Did you have something else that you wanted to say before I called on you?
No, I have a question, I guess, procedurally moving forward from this, regardless of what's happening with the vote. Maybe as a question for staff. So I guess while we're all ruminating some of the other things, the question that I have is, we were given as a part of our packet the red line version of the July version of the code, which I think was extremely helpful. I think the July version had a lot of changes that, is widely available for everyone to look at. But I think based on how many meetings is this now? Is this our third or our fourth meeting since it was out for us to look at everything? There is a substantial amount of red in this document that has been brought about through public comment, through our input, through council's input, through the technical working group's input. And I think in some ways it substantially changes the code from what is available to the general public right now. When I go on the website and you download a version of this to look at, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I looked at it earlier, I believe it's still the original unmarked up version that you can download. And I have some, I guess, comments moving forward that regardless of what happens here tonight and it goes on to council for review, it seems to me that there needs to be a public offering of the code that they're looking to adopt. Because right now, the code that's out there for anybody in the public who got that card to look at what's going on, that code is not the code that's being provided for adoption. So I guess my question for staff and even for this body is, what are we feeling in terms of, we've got enough issues with public comment right now and our ability to accept it. I sure believe that we better have current version of the document out there for public review before the two council meetings. Because even today, I went to the wrong spot and grabbed the code and started looking at it and wondered why I wasn't seeing the feral horse amendment. So I had to go to a different place and find that it was actually in our packet as opposed to out there for somebody who's not looking at our meeting minutes. So regardless of what happens tonight, which whatever our recommendation is, I would strongly advocate that staff takes either a non-red marked version of the current one or the red marked version of the original July version and put it out on the website so that the comments that the public can provide to council are based on what they're actually being asked to approve, because there's changes in here from even the last time we saw it. So that, Madam Chair, I meant to bring that up a little earlier in the meeting, but it seems like it's an appropriate time as we move closer to a recommendation to council.
Sounds good. Arlo, did you have a response?
Yeah, well, certainly this information is out there, but we will update tomorrow that website with these final documents and kind of get an update to the project site. I think if you go, it's probably not as direct. We need to demote the old version and promote the new version.
Thank you, Arlo, because I always forget where to find it at. So I just do the search for renovation and it brings me to the front page where the download is. So I suspect I'm not the only one who takes that approach.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we are ready to make a motion, Commissioner Gower, with some sustainability language. Annexation isn't necessarily something we need to put in the motion, but can be a recommendation to council through Arlo or a comment to council through Arlo. And same thing with abandonment. I did need to get some clarification, on Commissioner Marshall, on your construction hours. Is that something, I don't know if we can all agree on that, but moving forward with a motion, I think I heard you say that it was okay to add it as a comment.
I'll let the maker of the motion, Commissioner Gower, decide whether what he wants to do with anything on hours of operation.
No pressure, Commissioner Gower.
Madam Chair, I guess, I kind of land on different places on these items too. So why don't I throw something out here and then see how it sticks. So in the case of the Title 18 amendments, I move that, or I recommend that City Council approve the update by ordinance, including the sustainability menu in Chapter 4, Article 2, as currently presented, without the red lines that were forwarded back to the commission by council. It includes a recommendation that the Planning Commission review annexations. It includes a recommendation that additional findings be added to abandonments to clarify City Council's decision-making process relative to abandonments. And it includes codification of hours of operation. Madam Chair, that's where I land on those issues. Thank you. And I can make all the findings based on that too. Thanks.
This is Commissioner Marshall. I'd like to second that motion with a query back to the motion maker as to whether or not he would accept a amendment that would recommend the City Council that they direct staff to implement the trip reduction program as part of the business and administration code at the earliest convenience.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Yes, I would like to include that. I was unclear originally on what the directive was there, so that is the approach that I would prefer. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion?
This is Commissioner Belto. I'll be voting against the motion. The one thing I ask though is that when this is communicated to council, if council decides not to go along with the recommendation from Planning Commission, if it could be communicated in the red line version that was sent back to us. I just hope that that. Can you hear me now?
Could you try that again? We, right as you were communicating what you wanted communicated, it all cut out.
I got you. It was a trick. It's a trick on you all. Sorry. So what I was saying is, if council decides not to adopt the recommendation from the commission, I would just hope that it's communicated to them to try to fix or to consider fixing the ambiguity that is currently in the red line version of the code. I would just hate for council for that to not be addressed, because our recommendation is for them to mandate it goes into effect now, as opposed to clearing up what I deem ambiguous language in the proposed code.
Other discussion?
Madam Chair, I have a question also for the motioner. The motion indicated a removal of the red lines added in the set that we had received. I guess I'd like clarification on that, because I think there were some other red lines that were added within the body of the sustainability matrix. I just want to clarify that you're speaking about eliminating the red lines that were adding the 12-month moratorium.
Correct, thank you. So removing the language at the end of section 1804-202A and the general requirements referring to the 12-month delay in implementation. That is the language that I would like removed. All the other red line language is fine within that section.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. And then just maybe a follow-up to that, to Commissioner Velto's comment. We're making a recommendation here based on some additional comments. And I understand that some commissioners may be voting against that because of perhaps what was added or not added to this. And I guess maybe a question for staff, I would maybe pose that we take a question of anybody that's not in support of this moving forward, and maybe moving forward based on the motion with respect to comments about moving forward. You know, is it a result of what's in the motion, or is it a result of what's in the body of the text? So if that makes sense, because I believe that there's probably general support from all the members of this commission, as was pointed out in our public comment, of 99% of what's in here. So I believe that if, you know, we're all making some comments about what we want to add or not add, but I don't know that there's anything in here that's preventing us from wanting to see this move forward. So that's maybe a discussion item that I would have for any of the other commissioners. I believe that the motion as stated by Commissioner Gower meets all the criteria that I was looking for. So thank you.
Commissioner Olivas, I'll comment. I guess removing the 12 months waiting period, I'm good with. But I think when we add in the annexations, the abandonments, the hours, and the trip reduction, you lose me. I think that I think some of those have been addressed. We shouldn't be addressing them here. Council's getting it back to us is what they wanted on at least 3 of those, or 2 of those, I should say. No real word on abandonments, I don't think. But that said, that's the 12 months. I like the finality of it, and one way or the other, or if we waited 12 months with the certainty, I'd go with that. But I could go along with the motion on that point, but not the others.
Okay. Commissioner
Munoz. Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Velto.
Commissioner Munoz, you spoke first. Go for it.
Go ahead, Commissioner Munoz, please.
Sorry, I know I've been kind of quiet here, but I've been really listening to everything that's going on. I have to agree with Commissioner Olivas there. That's exactly my train of thought. If we get a one-way, either way, with the 12 months, I'm fine with that.
adding all those other things in, trip reductions, a big one. The hours of operations are a really big one for me. That's where you're going to lose me on the motion. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
So I guess I was under the impression that the 3 things that Commissioner Olivas and Commissioner Munoz just brought up were comments that we were going to make through Arlo to council, not necessarily in the motion. I'm not sure if now we need to go back and do you need to revise your motion, or do we need to try and vote on the motion and see what happens?
Can I make a suggestion? If this motion, kind of this blanket motion, let's take a vote on it. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't pass, let's go back to individual items. We will do very comprehensive kind of minutes and convey this discussion as well. So we'll try to get that as complete as possible.
Okay, so I guess, Michelle, can you do a roll call vote if there's no more discussion? We have a motion and a second on the table.
Okay. Commissioner Taylor?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Yes.
Commissioner Gower?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Munoz?
No.
Commissioner Olivas?
No.
Commissioner Velto?
No.
So it's 4-3.
So I guess that
The motion passes.
So that is the formal recommendation, those modifications listed. Would you like to do anything further other than convey the whole discussion like we discussed?
no, I think I don't. Other commissioners, other questions, comments, concerns for Arlo before we move on?
Maybe if I could state my understanding from this discussion, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong. Those who dissented from the motion generally dissented because they supported more of fewer changes from what came in front of you. So it wasn't that you were opposed to more things in the plan. You were opposed to some of these changes being recommended in this motion. Is that fair?
That's fair. Commissioner Olivas?
Commissioner Munoz, yes, that's also fair for me.
Commissioner Velto, I think I'm the only one that opposed the sustainability matrix as it was crafted and wanted to keep the moratorium for 12 months with, but also wanted to clarify the language from B to a policy that requires affirmative action by the council.
Okay.
Commissioner Olivas, I think that there needs to be clarification on the language to be closer to the intent either way. I'm not saying that I'm agreeing with Commissioner Velto on that it needs to be affirmative, but it needs to be clear on what it is.
Okay, Arlo, do you need anything else from us?
No, well, no. I want to thank all of you. I know this is a 650 page bundle. You've put a ton of effort and good thought and good debate into all of this. It's hard to do these big overall updates where it's not a distinct topic. So I really just want to thank all of you and assure you that, we will be back. We'll be monitoring this. We'll be, probably recommending refinements as we go through the implementation process. So I don't want anyone to feel like, hey, whatever gets adopted is fixed in stone and will never change for another 2 decades. And thanks again for all your time. I'm firmly convinced this is much better than our existing code, whichever way these discussion points go.
Thank you, Arlo, and your entire team for all the hard work that you guys have put into this. Many meetings, many hours. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 5, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report. Commissioner Gower, Commissioner Johnson.
Madam Chair, what I remember from the last meeting that we had last week was the RPC found the master plan amendment off of Cheney in conformance with the regional plan. That's probably one you would be interested in. Found the scheduled additions to the master plan, City of Reno master plan in conformance. And we received a presentation on the consensus forecast, which I thought was very interesting as well. And they have a website to check out the consensus forecast.
Well, I was lucky enough to sit in on your seat, Madam Chair, and there was the recommendation was made to approve or recommend approval to the Regional Governing Board to adopt the consensus forecast. I think the most interesting thing for me about that was, even with all our policies in terms of sustainability and other things, we are still forecasted to put 60% of our new residential homes in tier 2 lands. Actually, it's like 70% in tier 2 and above, which means we're still building the vast majority of our homes on the outside and not within the urban core. And so it's a little disappointing that pattern is not going to change for 20 years.
Angela, thank you for that, Commissioner Gower, Commissioner Marshall. Staff announcements.
I have no updates for the group. Again, can you not hear me? There we go. Lost my mic. Okay, how about now? No staff updates for the group. Again, want to give a huge shout out and thank you to everyone at the City of Reno that was able to help with the fire yesterday. Huge gratitude to the Reno Fire Department, Reno Police Department, and all of our communications. I'm sure you guys were all receiving Twitter and email blasts, and that is a huge work and 36 hours of work on a lot of these people's parts. And so huge thank you to everyone that was involved. And I'm glad that all of you are safe, and the damage was devastating, but hopefully minimal compared to what it could have been. So thank you to everyone, and our hearts go out to those that were impacted.
Thank you, Angela.
Can I jump in and do a little staff announcement? I don't want to take too much of your time. There was a fairly significant meeting today of the both city councils, Reno and Sparks, and the Washoe County Commission on issues of homelessness. It was really quite a meeting, I have to say. They heard a bunch of really good presentations on all the work that's going on to address our homelessness challenges. Really across the board support for strengthening those efforts and strengthening the coordination between agencies and potentially regionalizing the efforts. So there would be a regional homeless and homeless encampment type group that is dedicated to that across jurisdictional boundaries. And then they had a big action item at the end, which was a strong approval for land acquisitions in the Governor's Bowl area for a new homeless shelter site with associated wraparound services and affordable housing. Collectively, just about 15 acres of land is purchased or being purchased on the southwest corner of the Spaghetti Bowl. It includes the Governor's Bowl Park and the RV storage business to the south, Wells Cargo. It was quite a complex deal. It included the Reno Housing Authority essentially buying a 5-acre portion, and then the local governments collectively using CARES money buying the balance for a shelter, wraparound services, potentially a safe camp, things of that nature. So this was a long time in progress. Hundreds of people testified. I think almost all of them in support. It was very positive overall. So what that means for you as a body is you will be seeing a special use permit application for a homeless shelter on that site in the very near future. And you may see additional applications for other facilities in that area, depending what's decided down the road. So that was roughly 5 hours, 4.5 hours the elected officials spent today on that topic, and the outcome was positive.
Great, thank you, Arlo.
Madam Chair, may I just, I'd like to make a comment, and that acquisition of that property would not have happened without Arlo Stockham's great work. I mean, he put in so many hours to make this happen, and it brought all of our regional partners together to address this homeless issue. And it gives us a place to actually start planning to where these folks can get the resources they need. So Arlo did an excellent job on that. And so I just wanted to make sure that he's recognized for all of his hard work, not only on the homeless issue, but also with our code. So he's been doing an excellent job, and I just wanted to give him the recognition that he deserves. So thank you.
Don't prop me up. It was a huge team effort, including Carl's team. Dozens of people have been working on this for quite some time.
What are you going to do next year, Arlo?
I'm going to go have a beer.
You have a couple. Okay, agenda item number 7, Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items.
Madam Chair, just because we've had this sustainability question all night, I want to ask the question as to why Carl Hall's office has the auto lights thing going on, where if he doesn't move, his lights go off. But Jeff and Arlo can sit there and not move through the entire meeting and their lights stay on. I think there needs to be a little consistency across City Hall with respect to their daylight work. So maybe if we can have a little presentation on that at some point in time in the future, maybe after Arlo's had a beer.
I think they move a little more than I do.
I went dark as well. I just roll around to keep the lights on.
Sorry, I just that's something to make everybody laugh at the end of this.
Hey, to be fair, Commissioner Johnson, I sit in the dark for 95% of the day. Angela can attest to that.
Okay, moving on to item number 8, public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or any general public comment. Michelle, do we have any public comment?
I did not receive any public comment for this item.
Okay, we did have somebody that's been, I think, in the attendee, Linda Cross. She had her hand up. She's been here the whole time. She also sent us several comments via email, and I just wanted to mention that your comments were received. It was a request for a zoning change, and that is not something that the Planning Commission would do via public comment. So we did receive it, and thank you for your participation. We will close public comment if there's no more. I don't see any. And number 9, agenda item number 9, adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Third, fourth.
I think that's an aye for everyone. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.